So, dear Professor Collins, we, as feminist cultural operators in Europe, for Studio Rizoma, for European Allies, we are delighted to welcome you here in Teatro Garibaldi. Teatro Garibaldi is, as you see, a beautiful place that needs a lot of care, but also holds a great potential. And we as cultural operators are going to run it for 8 years normally. And we want to make of this theater a place of experimentation, thought, and building long-lasting resistance in Europe and the Mediterranean. So we are very honored that on your Italian trip, you accepted to join us this afternoon for this discussion. And for us, you are one of the main guests reopening the theater after these 8 years of closure. And we are extremely glad to reopen it under the auspices of audacious thought, deep reflections, and actions for social justice as a place for alliances and coalition building between people from throughout the world who want to fight injustice, discrimination, and the rise of the anti-gender movements and extreme right in Europe. Before we start our discussion, I just wanted to give you this little booklet about the future of the theater.
Grazie.
So today we're in the frame of Earth Day, and we would like to discuss with you the implications of the exploitation of the planet that often takes the form of environmental racism and potential forms of mobilization that can come out of such situations. I wanted first to ask you if in recent years you had the scope to look at pollution, exposure to chemicals and unsafe environments as a cause of lethal intersections and as a form of violence, and to look at forms of resistance that these situations have created.
The closest I've done in the last couple of years is my book, Lethal Intersections. One of the cases in that book is about an alliance between two women who were very concerned about pollution. Agent Orange would have been the drug, the pharmaceutical industry, and its effect on people and on the planet. Now, I was looking not so much at the damage itself, I was looking at how these two women came together across such differences. One was in the People's Army in the war in Vietnam and was not fighting, it was an anti-colonial struggle for her. She was one who saw her family members poisoned by this as the troops, the American troops, used napalm and cleared the land with this particular chemical. So the long-term intergenerational damage of that particular act through war and who basically benefited from that was something that was a lifelong cause for her. This particular person is currently in France. At the time I did this case, she was currently in France and suing for that. She formed an alliance with a woman in the state of Oregon in the U.S. who was very concerned about pollution and the industry there. And they discovered, and in that particular case, the person who was lost her family because she was targeted by people who really did not want to see her speak out about these particular issues. So she kept all these records. She really did all of this amateur history work of just never giving up because she refused to forget her children. They formed an alliance and came to, across distance, across culture, across generations, and were quite powerful and did a documentary. There's a documentary on them. So I was looking for places where people weren't just suffering, because I think we can pretty much document all the suffering. There's quite a bit of documentation of the damage now than 30, 40 years ago when it was not there. And I could say a bit about that too. But what was fascinating for me was to see the ways in which the tools in which that people are using to come together that are quite different from one another, but they figured out a way to do this. So that would be a current example in terms of a lethal intersection that had intergenerational effects in terms of birth damage and birth defects. But so that's the first thing that came to mind. The other was back when, I'd say a couple decades ago, before this was really even language. The whole notion of environmental racism, people thought was just secondary to like real racism. I mean, what is environmental racism? Why should we think about that? But I had the honor of meeting a colleague of mine who, gosh, I'm going to lose names today. They'll come back later on once I get myself going, who basically pointed out to me that this was his cause when there was nobody's cause. He started off and saying, first of all, we have to look at lead poisoning. So that's where I started. The environment of the lead in the buildings in cities where children were eating the lead paint. And that was a very long struggle to begin to look at the environment that way, and not just as the natural environment, but the built environment and how that has effects. And then learning that rates of lead poisoning were higher along highways because at one point all of the gasoline was leaded. So the lead was coming out in pollutants. So all this was connected, beginning to see the connections of the industrial culpability of all of this. The third that I think I'd really think about would be something called Cancer Alley. And that is in the south of the United States. And that is very much running through the Black Belt. This is where a lot of African Americans live. This is my area of expertise. This is why I'm focusing on this. I don't want to make it sound like I think other places are less important. But there, the whole notion of the chemical industry, just people living under really difficult conditions. And so the development itself actually kills people. So there are plenty of examples of this. The issue is what kind of groundswell organization you can build and what kind of legislation you can build to stop companies from polluting or taking them to court. So I'm really, this has not been central to what I work on, but I can clearly see the patterns of who ends up most negatively affected by all this based on categories of race, age, gender, where you live, geography, if you're urban, rural. And it isn't just rural and urban, because I've given examples that are both, one is urban and one is rural. People tend to think of this as not, divided. The demographic convergence is going to put certain people more at risk. Also in the book, Lethal Intersections, the one I just finished, I did one section on a city called Flint, Michigan, where you may be familiar with that particular case, where there was quite a bit of citizen advocacy because what was in the water? There was something in the water, dioxin. I've forgotten the chemical that was in the water. But basically, kids were just it was stunting their development because they were drinking this impure water. And the city and the state were culpable for this. And everybody knew. So citizens were really quite active in turning that around. But I can only be impressed by the level of diligence of community organizing, people on the ground who over time get up every day and say, this is my cause. I did not choose it, it chose me. This is my cause. So that's how I think I look at this particular issue on the small scale. Now, obviously, the big scale, we know so much more now than we used to in terms of climate change.
Highlighting the question of the war, because the war in Vietnam, but the current war is also really impacting, polluting the earth and impacting on specific categories of population. I just wanted to mention the few examples that we've been close to in the last years as European Alternatives and Studio Rizoma. For instance, in Cluj-Napoca in Romania, we work a lot transnationally. And we are close to advocates that defend the rights of Roma community. There is a Roma community in Cluj-Napoca that has been displaced about 10 years ago from social housing that was in the city center to new houses, which are located literally on a rubbish dump. And they have been located there because it's outside of the city center, is not accessible by public transport. And they have been put there because, it's clear environmental racism, and there is an idea behind it that also maybe they will find work on the rubbish dump rather than being unoccupied in social housing in the center. So it's a case that has been very close to us, and we've been developing solidarity, writing to the municipal buildings and so on. But it's something that is really disempowering to see such situation continue on and on. And the second example, maybe that is you know certainly very well, is the question of chlordécone in the French islands of Martinique. So basically there was this insecticide that was used in in growing bananas, that was forbidden in mainland Europe. But it was still going on to be continued. It was still used on the islands that are mostly populated by black citizens of France following the colonization. And there have been continued exposition of the population, high rate of cancer, issues of sterility, and fetuses malformation. And I was wondering, because these are cases in which there is a kind of a hidden form of violence, because the pollution now is becoming to be more presented and more present in the media as well. But for years and years, the pollution is hidden and the populations don't know about it. So as you highlighted, documenting it is a very strong civil act, and people have been really strong at it. But when there is cases of hidden violence, how can we fight? What are the potentially efficient forms of resistance that can emerge? Have you encountered any of these cases?
Well, this is the issue. You get a diagnosis and you can't go directly to resistance. You know, there's no rule book here. I mean, it basically is situation by situation, and asking the question, when you look at your own situation, what other situations resemble yours? I mean, it's the parallel information that we're losing. We can't just go from here up to somebody above and say, fix this or do something about it. So to me, the issue is really how to network people who have that knowledge with people who are experiencing something similar. I don't know, because here's the thing. I'm going to get myself in trouble here. Let me see how I feel about what I'm going to say. First of all, I need more information. Can I just look at this audience for a minute? I feel like I'm kind of talking to a television screen I feel like I'm at home on a Zoom call. And that's not what I want to feel like, all right? I want to have a sense of who is in the room so I can get a sense of, let me just see. If you don't mind, I'm going to look at you for a minute. Is this all right? I don't see any incredibly ugly people here, so this is very encouraging. All right, because this is serious material, and when you're going to deal with serious material like this, you don't want it to be superficial, right? So, to have a conversation, I would say, take that one case of Martinique and the banana workers and this is replicated so many different places. This is not unique at all. And the issue is, if it's not unique, why do we not see more connection of information about all of those places? Why are we not seeing that kind of scholarship or that kind of politics? Because what's involved there is pulling people from those situations, putting them in contact with one another, which is extremely difficult to do. So I'm just thinking, it's not like I don't want to hear a problem defined in such a way that you can't fix it. Maybe that's it. How would we go about defining these problems in ways that you can see the options for what you should do in how you define the problem, right? That is it's kind of a conceptual shift I'm trying to make for myself, because I don't want to overlook all the micro places where change could happen and it's already happening, because we already assume there's some big fix at the end that somebody else is going to do at some point. So I would ask, what are people doing in a situation like that to already either protect themselves, shield themselves, push back, find somebody who's an ally? What's already going on? I would look for the resistance. I would not automatically assume, because I see damage, that there's no acknowledgement or recognition of that damage. It's a question of what resource. I'm not happy with this either. I'm going to argue with myself for a while. Just stay with me, all right? Because this is how thinking goes. It isn't just, wow, here's a question and here's the answer. It doesn't work that way. I mean, it certainly does not work that way with political work. What you're always doing with political work is you're trying 5 different things and like weighing them all and then asking, well, your idea is good, but your idea is better, but is it really? And just really trying to piece it through. But it always has to be grounded in the specifics of the problem itself and of what it is you're trying to do. So I don't know. See, you're also hitting me at a time where I'm kind of raw from doing all this work on the problems that people actually have. I almost feel like, oh, I want to be more hopeful, and I am. That's what I have to really not work on, but that's what I want to analyze. How do we actually make sure that we're saying things that encourage people to persist and that do not make it worse? Okay. Sometimes you come in with all this information and you make it worse. People say, I didn't know how bad I had it. You mean I'm going to get cancer in 5 years? Okay. I mean, that's not helping. And so when it comes to this whole other end of, I'm assuming many of you in this room are activists, right? I would ask the question, this is the question for activists. What would this look like in terms of what would a genuine partnership that is helpful look like? And how much can you do and how much can you not do? There are limits to what we can do. That's very frustrating when you see something you cannot change. All right. Too much?
No. In your work, there is often the concept of unwell society. Then, how can Black and white women rethink the meaning of wellness in an unwell society?
The first thing is to acknowledge that the society is not well. I mean, many people assume that what is normal is natural and inevitable just because it's normal. And then they assume there's something wrong with me or whatever because of that normality, because so much of the messaging that we get says that. Flip it on its head and say, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. That does not mean that you are a perfect person. I'm not saying that. But it does mean that the way to address the things that may be unwell aren't necessarily all within you. They really have to be you and structural at the same time. When it comes to issues of wellness, people assume it's all just in the body, just the one body, that's it. There's something in your body or your mind that's the sickness. As opposed to, it's constructed. Society is seeing certain things in you as normal, not normal, all of that. So that is what I'd say about that quickly. You want to follow up on that and probe me to say more?
Yes, it's possible.
It's possible. I don't know. It's interesting because I wrote a piece recently. This piece was mentioned yesterday, and it was on wellness, which I don't write about much at all. This was really unusual for me to write this piece, but I decided I would do it because it was all about a major part of, I see, Black feminism and Black feminist thought is claiming normality for Black women and saying, we are not sick, there's nothing, no, that we have problems, but the society that we are in is sick. And does it really help you to try and fit into a society that will make you forever secondary, lesser than? Why would you do that? What you need to do is build a society or contribute to one, or find places where you can exhale and feel well. And one thing that precipitated that piece, I had to think about it because I don't often publish personal stuff, but my mother struggled for years with mental illness. She was, and basically in my mind, there was not a thing wrong with her. But but I knew she could not function all the time. But it wasn't like that somehow inside of her there was something wrong with her. And she was always saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And I thought, why are you saying you're sorry? This is why I'm a sociologist and not a psychologist, all right? Why are you saying you're sorry? What's going on in these structures that you've been denied the opportunity to have the education that you wanted? You've been denied the job that you wanted. You've been forced to train people who know less than you, and they make more money than you do in the job that you do have. You could not buy the house you wanted to buy because of the discrimination. I could see all of the ways that racism made people sick. And I could not see how there would possibly be a solution to that. Wellness was not going to occur without that racism going away. So this is really where the passion for that came. And looking in the literature, things like a Langston Hughes poem, What Happens to a Dream Deferred? It goes inward in terms of alcoholism. It goes inward in terms of mental health issues. It goes outward in terms of anger. This is really where a lot of the violence to me also comes. You know, people who just, we had a murder-suicide case yesterday, actually, that was really just heartbreaking. So, you know, it just, where does that anger go? A lot of the people who study domestic violence, you know, you've just got all kinds of things going on there. So I don't think the solution is really to say, society is fine, you're the problem. We're going to give you some counseling. Or worse yet, we're going to give you some drugs so you don't feel that way. But the deeper changes are needed.
Thanks a lot. I think I can jump a bit on it, and thanks for sharing this story that is very strong and that has been lived by, a lot of women as well who have had to answer to the fact that they were mentally ill. Yesterday, you presented your work in front of the Italian Sociology Society. And I was very pleased to listen to the way you presented your work and the cases you analyzed in your book. And at the end, you presented two forms of coalitions you have been analyzing and differentiating. The first, the coalition of convenience. I'm going to summarize very briefly. If I'm wrong, you can correct me.
I'll jump in.
The coalition of convenience based on affinity on a specific issue, short-term, in which ethics are not central, and as a politic strategic association. And the second, the coalitions of conscience based on necessity and long-term commitment, ethical foundations, and that create the base for durable political activism and community. Recently, we as activists in feminism and transnational actions, we've been living a form of opposition and impossible reconciliations between these forms of coalitions. I mean, in terms of the way we can create coalitions and work together. Often, those who truthfully and efficiently involve in building coalitions of conscience, they find themselves in the positions of, in which practically, because they lack energy, time, resources, because they need to dedicate all their energy to one cause they have chosen to go for, or ideologically, they choose or refuse to engage in coalitions of governance. That can also, there can be a lack of truth also in such coalitions, of trust, sorry, of trust. And I mean, when I started my feminist life, I learned a lot from the Combahee River Collective statement from 1979 that still remains with me as like one of the strongest statements in terms of doing these coalitions of convenience. Because so the Combahee River Collective was a group of feminist Black lesbian women, and in their statements they really say like, look, even though, and they were fighting also for the civil rights movements, and in their statement they say, look, okay, we know the men can be the oppressors, but we need to stand by Black men to make wins in the civil rights movements, despite us knowing as lesbian Black women that they don't necessarily fight for our cause. And yes, basically, I was wondering if you've come across examples of how coalitions of convenience, how in these coalitions, those who arrive as less powerful or with the knowledge that they won't have all their needs recognized in this coalition, manage to both fight for the common interest, defend themselves, and challenge power relationship.
I think the example of the Combahee River Collective really says it all. Because when you're in a coalition of conscience, you have no choice to leave. You really are in it for the long haul. Those women could not choose not to be Black and say, we're just going to be lesbian, that's enough. And for that to be the answer to the convergence of things that they talked about. This was a really important statement about for intersectionality, about the convergence of capitalism, racism, sexism, and let me just think, I'm going to say homophobia is what it would have been there, as opposed to heteropatriarchy. And what they were basically saying is we have to think differently for all of us to move forward in what we thought we were fighting for. That's the common goal, the common commitment. And the common commitment in that particular case was freedom. That was going to be the broader social goal. We know we're not free. We want to be free. None of us can be free unless all of us are free. And if one of us appears to be free because he is a male, and that is based on the lack of freedom of the other person in the group who happens to be female, then that is an imperfect solution. You can't stop at that point. Now, we're willing to wait and take turns in terms of who's at the front of the line and having their issues front and center. But that doesn't mean we are perpetually, intergenerationally in a hierarchy of always being second class. So when I think about that particular example, what they were doing was they were pushing for change from within an existing coalition, but not having it be everyone's equal, it's equally balanced, it's all of that. It was really politically sophisticated for the times. The time had to be right to ask for certain types of claims. And I think those are the types of coalitions that often are within people who just have a shared experience, that it's a shared challenge, differently experienced, that do last over time. That's very different than trying to form a coalition around an ideological position where people don't know each other and we all agree because we hate capitalism. That's a very different position, because type of situation. That's often a coalition of convenience. People are coming together because they have a shared perspective, but they're not involved in the long haul. That has to be built in the long haul. But they're not necessarily inherently aligned with one another. That's what has to be constructed. So the Combahee River Collective had to construct a new reality within an existing form of what I call community politics or coalition. Whereas in other cases, you really are working across categories of people bringing very different experiences, but who feel very strongly about a social issue that they may experience differently. And that's a different kind of process. There, to me, coalitions of convenience, and I mean convenience not in a negative term. I mean it as it's like, wait a minute, in this moment, it is really good if we get together because we're better together. We're stronger together. But at some point, when this issue is further along or when things change, we may not get along as well as we thought we did. So it may not last. And it's all right to have a coalition that is really targeted to solving a certain problem and then moving on. It doesn't have to last forever. Some of the cases that you mentioned earlier, the environmental cases, there may be people who come in who are activists. They're coming into communities that will have been there forever, are going to be there after activists come. So the coalition of convenience is really a powerful one between activists and people on the ground. But activists are not coming in to stay there forever, for life. They may move on to the next situation or only stay for a short term or a long term. It's not one of these, our fates are intertwined and woven together. And I think the Combahee River Collective, it gives a really good example of having a shared fate. All right, and that shared fate lies at the basis of an ethical commitment that is, all of us have to fight for freedom, because it doesn't matter if you get it and I don't, then we're all vulnerable still in some ways. So it is altruistic. It's not like it's not like it's whatever. It's not altruistic. So anyhow, if I think about the differences between the two, that's one. Now, building coalitions of any kind is not necessarily easy, because very often people don't want to, if your stuff is not clearly in the middle of everything, somehow it's not serving you. There's an element of, I just want to say, wait your turn, but you're going to get a turn, right? But you have to be willing to wait your turn. So that's terrible. Let me take that back. I'm thinking of something specific, and I really shouldn't be. I should be telling you what the specific is and then telling you why I'm thinking about this. But anyhow, say something back to me. Give me a sense. Where are you going with this? Shall I keep going? Shall I go back? Or what shall I do with this?
Well, it's just that in a coalition of convenience, if you're waiting for your turn, like I would say many women have done in the left-wing movement of the 70s, just waiting for their turn and their question of gender to be taken into account, or like racialized women in the women's movements waiting for too long for their turns and having to build new forms of groups. So when you are in such a coalition of convenience, how do you do to challenge the power so that your issue is not eaten by the main issue and just overseen? You know what I'm trying to say?
I know exactly what you're trying to say. I think this is the whole point of women, certain women being way too nice. All right, really. You know, I could actually flip this and say, what would a coalition look like that had men in it, where men were, like, for example, men who are supporters of domestic violence issues. They're supportive of women. Now, do they expect to come into the group and sort of run the group because they're men and they have experience? No. I mean, the whole notion of learning how to be secondary is important. It doesn't mean you always have to be the leader. To me, the issue is the person that has the skills and the talent is the person who is leading at the time, who has the perspective. It could be a situation of a group that has a lot of young people in it and its leadership is old. And the young people come in and they say, why don't we ever get to lead? Because all these old people won't get out of the way. Because they do have the wisdom on that particular issue, but they don't necessarily have the new vision of being new to the group. That can be an issue. That's an issue with a lot of established organizations in the U.S. All right, where they just won't. Anyhow, you see where I'm going with this? We just really need more flexibility within the category of coalition. That isn't just one way of doing it, which is a certain kind of hierarchy that doesn't change, and that often says the person who has what we perceive as being the greatest need always comes first. That would be the hierarchy of gender within Black politics. That basically the Black women were saying, no, yes, clearly Black men have it hard in terms of violence issues, but the issues that we have as women are equally important, but may not be as visible. We're gonna have to work together so that we both can progress in the situation that we are in because we have a shared fate. Okay, so that's one way. Now, how to build that in other organizations around different issues and around different clientele. I think the issue about, to be perfectly frank, young people and senior leadership is an important one. All right, so, because, you have a lot of people that don't want to get out of the way, and some of them are, in fact, feminists in women's organizations, if I might say that, with the, oops, sorry. So that's more where I'm going with this, is really how to come up with a language that helps people be self-critical and analytical about their own process that they're going through. That it's not just you. The cause is enough that we're all in solidarity together, and we will just go into the future without thinking about how we're going to work this differently. Good example would be Black Lives Matter movement. That to me, they're networked with, they don't have the big poobah leader. One of the reasons that I think it was as effective as it was is because they said, we will leave nobody behind. But that doesn't mean that there's a playbook where everyone has to be the same way in order to be in this particular coalition. It's very much decentralized. And for that reason, it's just, even though things are not in the press, that does not mean it's gone away.
Okay. You emphasize the importance of self-defined knowledge as a condition of emancipation. In today's context, self-defined knowledge can become a tools of resistance, and not only against injustice, but against unsustainable order, global order, ecological order. It's possible to think this self-defined knowledge as a tools for emancipation.
If you cannot present an alternative, why would I follow you to change anything? So I think the people who are in fact generating alternative ways of thinking and being, especially those that have long been in existence, that we have assumed weren't there, right, in some ways are at the front of the line to exert leadership in this particular issue. And I went to indigenous peoples in terms of care of the planet. When you have all kinds of practices, you have wisdom there, you have knowledge. What's happened is as the silencing of that knowledge, or the harnessing of that knowledge, extraction of that knowledge for pharmaceutical industries and a variety of other things. So when I think about that, the vision that goes along with the knowledge isn't just accidental. It's sort of saying, giving people, there are other ways of being than what we do now, is my point. And there might be other ways of being in the future that draw upon the leadership of people who have really good ideas about how to do things differently than slash and burn, or insecticides, or a variety of things. So I'm just thinking, I don't know, the political solution of how you get from here to there, if that you're asking me about that, I don't know if there's a fast track for that. For me, it's back to place by place, community by community, family by family, organization by organization, because that's the stuff that sticks. That's the bottom-up stuff, all right? It's not the top-down stuff. That top-down stuff, it's winning right now. But a lot of what we're doing now is completely unsustainable. So what are we going to do when it's clear it's not sustainable, right? So, and who's going to know alternatives? Who's going to know, but if we do it this way, it won't happen that way anymore?
If anyone has some questions, curiosity, doubts, this is the right timing to do that. Don't be timid, just raise your hand.
This is a public forum for ideas to be shared. And I'm interested in hearing from you. I mean, I know what I think already about a lot of things.
Why? I come directly to you.
My question is kind of also going in that direction of like hierarchies in activism and science. And I get the feeling that people who face struggles, who have like problems, who have like social problems, who are the oppressed ones, are always the ones who have to explain themselves and how those problems affect themselves, their health, their status. So I wonder how like people, fucking white privileged Western people, can like support people who are oppressed and face struggles without like getting in those top-down hierarchies and without like taking the voice away from people who actually face the problems.
I love that question. Thank you very much. No, can I comment on this a little bit to you? Because I think this is just going to go much better for me if I'm not trying to be academic Collins, all right, Dr. Collins. It would be really nice not to be that for, 5 minutes for a while. This reminds me very much of when I was working in community politics. I would just like to talk about it that way because this has been so foundational to so much of my work. It might be helpful for you to hear some of the backstory there. I was very much involved in the schools movement in Boston, Massachusetts, because my concern was Black children were being badly educated and they were being, quote, oppressed. We didn't have that language at that time. And many of us were concerned about that. So the questions were among education personnel, people who I was training to be a teacher, other people were teachers already. We had people who had varying levels of expertise around things. And I had a friend named Bob. Bob was a white guy, and we were both in graduate school together. And I was working in the Black schools of Roxbury. And I could go into the schools, and everybody knew it was really wrong what was going on in the schools. And Bob wanted to do something. He said, I want to do something about racism. I said, Bob, he said, I want to come to Roxbury. I said, Bob, we don't need you in Roxbury. What we need is for you to go to South Boston High School. And if you know anything about Boston at that time, it was very segregated. The schools were very segregated racially, but they were also segregated by class. And in fact, if you went into those schools, you would see the same disadvantages among Black kids and white kids who were both being starved by the system and not served adequately. That was the class analysis. So I said to Bob, why don't you go to South Boston High School, which was notorious for working class white kids who were assumed to be racist, and see how that goes. Start seeing if you can work with them around racism. So Bob went off to South Boston High School, and he came back and said, whoa. Because I said, this is where the change needs to happen. Not just in Roxbury, or not just in South Boston, but we need people working in specific situations, doing what they should be doing best in those situations, as opposed to trying to have a fake coalition across racial lines and singing Kumbaya, because that's not going to work in this situation. So I learned from him, he learned from me, and I even got myself invited to go to his school. I said, I have no entry into your school. I have no way to go there with it being safe. And I found a way. He invited me and I came. He said, I can't get the kids to talk about race. And I went in there and I said, I looked at these guys, they were kids, and they looked at me and we all sat there. And I said, Bob, you do realize they're not going to talk about race if I'm in the room. You do realize this, right? So his learning curve had to be pretty steep there. But mine was as well, because I was shocked to go into a school that was so poorly resourced as the one that I had come out of. I didn't realize that. I assumed all the white schools were much better off. So this was the kind of coalition that interested me. People who that's not one that's kind of the Combahee River Collective part, all right? This is the coalitions that are across points of view, resources, experiences, where people can teach and learn from one another and work together on a common cause, as long as it makes sense to do so. And then we move on. I don't even know where Bob is at this point. He's just some old white-haired man. I couldn't even pick him out of a crowd of 3. But my point is that experience was quite important for me. And then we moved on. And this is what I mean about convenience, all right? It was convenient because it worked, not because it was just easy. It's convenient because I don't have to take the bus anymore. I can drive. I mean, probably needed a better word, but I'll work on that. But that's what I have in mind. And I think it's at some point, you really have to put down the whole, see, universities do not do us a service sometimes. We have all these people running around the US worried about, I don't want to offend any, I want to be in solidarity with all these other people, but I don't know how to do it. And what I want to say is go home. Go home and talk to that relative who is the person who is, go home, or don't even go home. If you do, go home and get some money and bring that back. That would be good too. You know, we have to think outside of the box of what activism is and what politics is and what alliances are and what coalitions mean. And that is one experience of many that I think I would use to answer that question. There are so many well-meaning people out there, but you have to know when to lead and when to follow. Ooh, I love that question.
Thank you. Anyone else?
So I want to just focus a little bit about what you say about learning to be secondary. I think it was really powerful phrase because I found myself thinking about it in two aspects of my life. One is in the academia because I'm a researcher, I'm a PhD candidate, and the other is the activism. And so as PhD candidates, we always ask ourselves, because we do a PhD on migration and societal change. And I'm talking about migrant women victim of domestic violence in specific. And I find myself a lot thinking about why I am the one saying this stuff, why I'm taking these, I find myself in this thinking about I'm doing it because I have the privilege to do it, because I was able to study, going to academia, and then I succeed in doing a PhD. And so I'm using my privilege to talk about this problem that is really important, but also sometimes I feel like I'm not the one that should be talk about this problem, because I'm not the one that is experienced this problem in my skin, in my life directly. And this is something we talk about a lot as a PhD researcher that study migration, because here in Palermo there is a big community of migrant people, and we try to work in our research by doing activism, so by doing experience and not just in talking about theory, but give really something, go in the field and meeting people and really learn from them and talk about this problem, but with this type of learning. But I don't know if sometimes it's right, my thought is right, because I'm using this privilege for doing that, so I'm right, or then I think maybe I'm not seeing what these women need. Maybe because I'm white, I'm privileged, and I'm not sure I am able to find what is the problem, what is the thing we should talk about, the law we should reform, and stuff like that.
You're just putting so much pressure on yourself. I mean, I guess I would say is, if you're the one that got to go to school and you're the one that has the privilege, how do you use the privilege? How do you use it? It's not a question of being the representative of the women. So often in what you just said, I heard you say, how do I represent what they need? How do I make sure, because I'm speaking for them, da, da, da. You obviously see the issues of speaking for people when you're speaking to power, right? When you're in these institutions of power and you're the one, they're often looking at you that way, like you're their representative. Be the informant for us, for them. So you can see the dangers of extraction, because that is what a lot of social science research does. It extracts all this data from these people, and then it puts it into other frameworks that don't fit those experiences. So it's good to be wary of that. But at the same time, you don't know what they need. That's the bottom line, too. They know what they need. The bottom line is also developing parallel conversations, even if you're not there to have them directly, engaging with the work that they do so that you get a sense of that's the self-definition. They are telling someone what they need. The issue is it's not necessarily being heard, or it's not being told in such a way that it's clear to them or to others. It's being formed. It's in formation. It's in process. So you're the go-between, right? That was, earlier, Ignacia talked about the term outsider within. And that's very much how I feel I am in multiple situations. I'm never a total insider. Interestingly, you would think I'm a total insider in terms of the academy. That's what I want them to think. And it's going quite well, as in, yes, you have socialized me. You can claim me, but you don't get everything, right? I get some stuff from you, too, and I deliver it back to people. That's one way of looking at it. But the other piece, never feeling like the total insider. I will never be 100% relaxed in an academic setting. I just won't be, because I know how it's organized. But at the same time, I can't go home again either. I can't go and hang out with black women and say, yeah, my sister, we're all in this together. We are not, all right? We have to figure out ways of talking with people across those differences that are not scripted, as they very much are when you're doing research. Or if you're just snooping, and it's called ethnographic research. I'm going to sit here and watch you and take notes. That's snooping, all right? What are the structures that we can develop where you are actually delivering something back in your work? And that can also depend on what kind of field you're in and what research methods you're using and all of that. But I think the core question is the one that you asked. You will never be completely comfortable in either of those places because you have been changed by the journey. And how is that going to work for you? How will you use that outsider perspective, which is useful for seeing certain things that insiders cannot see? The migrant women, they cannot see certain things you can see, just because of just a variety of reasons, access, literacy, bunch of stuff. But, so you have to think about how to be helpful given that, all right? And looking the other way, what kind of work can you choose to do? Because there's things you still don't see about research because you're not far enough, you're not further along. You see more as you go further along. You recognize the magnitude of the issues. So I love this question, too. That's 2 for 2. Thank you very much with this, because I think this is a very important thing for all of us to think about.
I think we still have one intervention somewhere.
Hi. Firstly, you're very charming even when you're frustrated. Just wanted to start with that.
It's a skill. You have to develop it. It comes from many, many, many faculty meetings. All right? You must understand the people I hang out with. Not these people, other people.
One more comment, and then I get to my question. I feel like there's a lot of legs, potentially, in a campaign slogan of "Be like Bob." I'm going to remind myself of that. Thank you. But my question is, it feels like, maybe people have always felt like this, but that there are quite a lot of scary things happening. A bunch of scary things happening. Number one, degradation of the climate. There's the growing manosphere. There's a scary orange man, and we're cooking up our own fascists over here as well. And I wondered if, in that context, you think coalitions of convenience are easier or harder when there's this much to come up against? Or if maybe there's always been this much. What do you think?
I think there's always been this much. And I basically think that certainly these are existential threats now. I mean, I think in the past, really the existence of humans. So that's what I mean by existential. In the past, but the issues of the past were just as big, just as overwhelming, just as awful. If you have a system of chattel slavery where you kidnap millions of people and rape people and keep their kids and you do all of that and the land is different. I mean, if you have that going on a global scale, and I could just go war after war after war. And I think many generations of people looked around the world at the time and they said, my gosh, this is just amazing. What can we do in this situation? But they found things to do. they figured it out. Even when things look, I don't want to say they're darkest, but I remain impressed by what commitment can do. When people are committed to something, they find other people who share those values with them, even if they have to fight to make something happen. And they become creative about making something happen. Sometimes they go underground. In fact, most of the time they are underground. That's why we don't know about it, because it's quite dangerous to do a lot of the work that people have done in the past. So we assume that the change is going to come on television. There's going to be a great leader that's going to come along and channel the other great leader, and then somehow there will be peace and happiness. That's how a lot of very young people think. No, not at all. I think a lot of the change comes from the everyday activism, even if no one says it or no one names it as such. The woman who decides and says to her child, "You are beautiful. I don't care if the world thinks you're ugly. You're beautiful, and I'm going to feed you and clothe you to the best of my ability, even if people call me a bad mother. I don't care, because this is the gift that I'm giving to you of your humanity, and you need to pass that on to somebody else." Now, that's a very powerful political message, and that is the kind of message that people who are pretty low on the status hierarchy regularly share. You see, they already live values that many of us say we are aspiring to, which is valuing human life in terms of how they care for each other to the best of their ability. So I think there's plenty of space to think about how to attach or how to build tiny little coalitions or big coalitions. Doesn't always have to be big and then everybody knows you did it, that kind of thing. The recognition issue, get over it. Just do it and quit worrying about being recognized for it, all right? There's plenty of space there to build that around any of these issues, because something's going to distress somebody to the point where they simply refuse to remain silent or to remain inactive. And the issues will be different for each person. So I'm going to just put my faith in the people who I don't know their names are. I know the names of the people who are like the enemies. I know their faces. I know the historical examples because it's historical now. And we can see what's coming back around quite clearly. But I put my faith in people because they will always surprise you. Somebody will come up with something that never crossed your mind. Like, oh, let's try that. So let's see what people do. It's not random either, by the way. It's collective. But I'm saying individually, but it starts there. It is collective. It is structural. But it's got to start somewhere.
Thank you. Last chance. Anyone else? Okay, can we go ahead? Are you tired?
I am just getting my energy.
Super. So we have the whole night.
We're okay. No, we're going to at some point have to feed me, but that's about it.
Hi. There's been so much that resonated in this conversation so far, but for the coalition of convenience, this idea of coalition of convenience, I have a very recent personal thing that I would like to bring into this space and maybe hear your take. So I'm Hungarian and I live in Budapest, where last week we had very big elections where 80% of the country voted, which has never happened before. And we managed to change the corrupt authoritarian Fidesz government, which was a euphoric win. I've never experienced this before in my life. Going outside on the streets and seeing people genuinely happy and saying like it's over, like we're free. It was beautiful for a night, because the next day I started realizing and I started talking to people that the reality of this was the reason we made this change is because we created a coalition of convenience. Because even me, I, as a feminist, queer, left-leaning person, I voted for the party that overtook this regime, which is a conservative right-wing party.
That's it.
Because that was the only way of overtaking
There you
it. And I did this amongst many other people from my communities, hoping that this is the first change, and then after this change, there will be another change where our struggles will be heard. And unfortunately, in the weeks since then, there's been multiple people in kind of media and like these influencers or voices who are using very, for example, sexist language to talk about this overtaking, this defeat, and reinforcing patriarchal ideas. And I'm not saying I'm starting to lose hope, but I feel like this euphoria of the victory has been taken away, not just from me, but also from other people who, voted against technically their own ideals. So yeah, I guess I'm wondering how do you reclaim the victory, and how do you feel motivated to mobilize again and try and do more change? Yes.
That's when you're entering into the sphere of the coalition of conscience, because it's a long struggle. That's the issue. Conscience is a long struggle. So the moment of euphoria is the victory to be celebrated. That is the victory party. That's Saturday night. That's even Sunday. But then you have to get up Monday and continue to do the same work, only differently, because the backlash against your victory has begun. That's the thing. That's the nature of this. That when you win, you have to do as much as possible. And when you lose, you can see it. It's easier to see the opponent. But now you've got all these now new friends who knows who they are now. And interestingly, you say, I voted against my ideals. I've never voted for anyone that matched my ideals. And I've been voting for decades. So the whole notion of looking to electoral politics through that lens, sadly, that is not what it's about in terms of governance. So for me, the next issue would be, well, what do you really care about that you are now willing to shift your position to do something different next? Or it's important to not mourn, but celebrate the victory. But is the coalition enough? Do you need to dissolve that coalition and go deep cover and take over positions in the government yourself? And then network? You're smiling, but this is really how people work, right? I mean, interestingly, I discovered there was a network of Black women who got together in Boston who decided they were going to get themselves elected to all these different boards in the city, one on each board. And the board would think, oh, we have a Black woman, that's really nice, we're integrated, yes, we can do whatever we wanted to do. And what they did was they would leave and caucus and tell each other what was going on in the other organizations, so there was a united front without there appearing to be a united front. They couldn't put a name or a face to where the movement was coming from. It was very sophisticated. So beginning to think about, thinking out of the box about how a coalition might look and itself be invisible. So I don't know. I like to think we're smarter than them. I come at it that way. Okay, we're smarter. We've got more in. We know this now. Where are their weaknesses? What are they assuming about all these women who now are just going to say, oh, I'm so afraid of you because is it the manosphere word that you're using? You manosphere people are just coming out of the woodwork saying horrible things. As long as what they say cannot hurt you and you can surround them, and if you call the shots, knock yourself out. The issue is what you're trying to deliver, what change you're trying to bring about, and for who. And if people get in the way, that's one issue. But if it's you can't just be distracted by all that. That's just so much energy. I mean, the social media stuff is so much energy. As an organizational tool, fabulous, really is. But as other stuff, public opinion, it really can just take so much more time than what comes out of it. So I don't even know who these guys are. And I can tell you right now, the first thing I do is not listen. Unless they're running something or controlling a budget. And that's a really different set of issues. So I was euphoric to see what happened in Hungary. I was euphoric to see all of those people celebrating. But at the same time, what's the word? Maria Nessa's book, How to Take Down a Dictator. She has a book about how to live with a dictator. There's some really good stuff out there where people are thinking in quite sophisticated ways about how to deal with these situations. So I don't want you to use your idealism. I really don't. But I think the issue is to take the idealism and turn it into an action strategy. I'm still very idealistic. I said earlier, I believe in people. I believe in babies. Every time I see a little kid, I just like, yeah, all you know, you are so fresh on this earth that all you know will be the stories that we tell you. That's it. It's not in the air, in the water, anywhere. It's what we tell you will be the reality that we have created for you. And you can see them just trying to touch their toes and smiling at everybody and giving you presents and all this kind of stuff. This is how people start out. How they end up is something really different. Those are our stories. So you're in a wonderful position because you now know it's possible. So imagine if you went through your whole life living under a fascist regime and you never knew anything other than that. But you had to dream that it was possible. You know that it's possible. Now it's a different question now. It's a good position to be in.
Thanks so much, Professor Collins, for being with us this afternoon. Really, we really enjoyed to have you here. And thanks to you all for coming. I would suggest now to have a little rest, a glass of something, wine or whatever, a beer. And thanks again.
Thank you to the panelists, too.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Professor Bartolini and Ségolène Prover.
All of you.